Mrs. Rai was kind enough to say that the shawl may be a bit warm for the weather today, and I said, well, these days I'm getting a chilly reception. Perhaps it was the appropriate thing, but I must say the notion of being called a distinguished global thinker is quite disconcerting. It reminds me of Napoleon's famous crack about the Holy Roman Empire, that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. I fear you're giving this award to someone who is neither distinguished, no longer very global, and rarely enjoys much time to think. As I believe Groucho Marx said when presented an Oscar, I'm delighted to accept this award before you realize your mistake. I really would like to congratulate the IILM Institute for Higher Education, which has also developed over a very short period of time to be one of the major institutions of higher learning in our country, with a network of schools, colleges and institutions of higher learning in India. And I'd like to really compliment you. I'm delighted that this is probably very indiscreet of me that Anil Rai was able to mention to me as I came in that not only were we at college at roughly the same time, he even voted for me in my first election, which happened to be for presidency of the Union there. And I do want to compliment you all for your contribution, Mrs. Rai, for the cause of quality education and training in our country. Now I'm happy to address the topic of global governance, which was what we had settled on when Ambassador Rajan and I discussed what might be useful to consider from the perspective of global thought. Global governance is something that I have worked in at the United Nations for 3 decades, but it's also, I think, a theme of compelling interest to me in my present incarnation, so I thought I'd talk about it. But global governance is not, in fact, not exactly the most precise concept dreamed up by political scientists today. It's used to describe the processes and institutions by which the world is governed. And it was always intended to be an amorphous idea, since there is no such thing as a global government to provide such governance. So global governance is a term that tries to impose a sense of order, real or imagined, on a world without an organized system of government. Now to describe it, I focus on 4 essential aspects. The first is history. The institutions of global governance today are those that emerged after the disasters of the first half of the 20th century. And I think we must never forget the past if we are to understand the present and focus on the future. In the first half of the 20th century, the world saw 2 world wars, countless civil wars, mass expulsions of populations, and the horrors of the Holocaust and Hiroshima. It was a period in which I think the world must have really wondered whether we as a collective humanity were likely to survive. Tolstoy had already written that memorable line that if you were not interested in war, it didn't matter, because war was interested in you. That was what was going on to everybody, and that's what happened throughout the first half of the 20th century. Then things changed. In and after 1945, a group of far-sighted leaders were determined to make the second half of the 20th century different from the first. So they drew up rules to govern international behavior, and they founded institutions in which different nations could cooperate for the common good. That was the idea of global governance, to foster international cooperation, to elaborate consensual global norms, and to establish predictable, universally applicable rules to the benefit of all. And the keystone of the art, so to speak, was the United Nations itself. The UN was seen by the world leaders of that time as the only possible alternative to the disastrous experiences of the first half of the century. It stood for a world in which people of different nations and cultures could look on each other not as subjects of fear and suspicion, but as potential partners, able to exchange goods and ideas to their mutual benefit. The UN was seen by visionaries like former US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the only possible alternative to that kind of world history I've summarized for you. And as FDR Roosevelt stated in his historic speech to the 2 US Houses of Congress after the Yalta Conference, the UN would be the answer to the military alliances, balance of power politics, and all the arrangements that had led to war so often in the past. His successor, the US President who actually presided at the birth of the UN, Harry Truman, put it clearly, and I'll quote, "You have created a great instrument for peace and security and human progress in the world," he declared to the assembled signatories of the United Nations Charter in San Francisco on June 26, 1945. And I continue quoting, "If we fail to use it, We shall betray all those who have died in order that we might meet here in freedom and safety to create it. If we seek to use it selfishly for the advantage of any one nation or any small group of nations, we shall be equally guilty of that betrayal. We all have to recognize, Truman went on, no matter how great our strength, that we must deny ourselves the license to do always as we please. No one nation can or should expect any special privilege which harms any other nation. Unless we are all willing to pay that price, no organization for world peace can accomplish its purpose, and what a reasonable price that is. Quote, unquote, an American president of that day. Now, Truman's conviction was that the sacrifices that soldiers had made in the Second World War to create that moment in San Francisco would only be justified if you had an arrangement in which all countries felt they had an equal stake. That was a very clear and strong vision, and there's no question that the setting up of the global institutions in 1945 is something we can all look back on with a sense of admiration and, dare I say it, gratitude. Not to imply that paradise descended on earth in 1945. We all know that tyranny and warfare continued, the Cold War broke out then. Billions of people still live in the world in extreme and degrading poverty. But in fact, the overall record of the second half of the 20th century, and I'm speaking now from the perspective of the end of the first decade of the 21st, is one of amazing advances. A Third World War didn't occur. The world economy expanded as never before. There was astonishing technological progress. Many in the industrialized world came to enjoy a level of prosperity and have access to a range of experiences that their grandparents could scarcely have dreamed of. And even in the developing world, there was spectacular economic growth. Child mortality has been reduced. Literacy has spread. The peoples of the developing world threw off the yoke of colonialism, and those of the Soviet bloc won political freedom. Democracy and human rights may not yet be universal, but they are now much more the norm than the exception. Now, the second important feature I said I'd give you before is the global nature of the determining forces of today's world. There are broadly two contending and even contradictory forces in the world in which we live today. On the one hand are the forces of convergence, the increasing knitting together of the world through globalization, modern communications and trade. And on the other hand are the opposite forces of disruption, of religious polarization, of the talk of the clash of civilizations, and of terrorism. Now the two forces, one pulling us together, the other pushing us apart, are both concurrent phenomena of our times. And these are taking place in a world in which, though I may be accused of being excessively India-centered, 2611 was in many ways emblematic of this paradoxical phenomenon. Why do I say this? Because the terrorists of 2611 used the instruments of globalization and convergence, the ease of communications, GPS systems and mobile telephone technology, five-star hotels frequented by the transnational business elite, and so on, as instruments to advance their fanatical agenda. Similarly, on 9/11 in New York, rather than as forces to bring the world closer together, the terrorists also used similar tools. The jet aircraft being crashed into those towers that were so emblematic of global capitalism, while the doomed victims of the planes made frantic mobile telephone calls to their loved ones. So both 9/11 and 26/11 were grotesque moments in that way.